This is the sixth commandment. This is sixth in the series as far as looking at the practicality of the Ten Commandments and how we can apply them to our lives. Um, as far as Okay. So, like always, I try to present an agenda so that we can stick to our focus on the topic, and that way we can be able to get through the information nice and smoothly without having to get off track. Um, Likewise, it'll be the opening story. We'll have a discussion about mental health, talk about depression. We'll look at spiritual depression versus physical depression. We're going to also look at what it means to kill versus to live. And then we're going to start talking about resilience before we close out. So, before we start, let's open with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you once again, Lord, for this blessed Sabbath day. Thank you, Lord, for your love, your care, your grace, and your mercy towards us. And I just pray, Father, Lord, that you tabernacle with us at this moment. Give us the ears, give me the mouth to speak. And Lord, where it's all said and done, I pray that you may be glorified. In Jesus' name, amen. So our opening story this morning is going to come from Jeremiah chapter 20. And as we read, I want you guys to pay attention to the anguish of Jeremiah, the ups and downs, the rationalization, to obey the Lord, even though it was to his hurt. He was being censored by his loved ones, though he was trying to warn them. He was essentially hated by the very ones he loved, being placed in stocks, as you see exampled in this picture here, which is an item that is used to torture a person. He was being placed in derision, or the object of ridicule, and yet still able to see the malice that everyone thinks towards him, even though he only wished for their good. Can you only imagine the feelings of Jeremiah? The feelings of God, who only has good thoughts towards us, and we ridicule him and contrive malice in our hearts through continuous rebellion. This is one of the many stories that I believe most fittingly describes depression in the Bible and the struggle that one experiences when depressed. And if you recall some time ago when I had to speak, I referenced a lot of these thoughts, but I stopped short of actually saying that I also suffer from clinical depression. And at one point in life, I didn't want to die. I truly didn't mind it, or wanted to even continue living. I could not make sense of this world, could not make sense of the fake pleasantries when interacting with others, hated the thought of even socializing with others, bound to responsibilities that I did not choose, and truly couldn't find any purpose in continuing to live. But since this point in my life, I've honestly lost the fear of death. Not because I gained some miraculous courage, but the care about death literally became a moot point. But God is good. And hopefully at the end of this discussion, you will truly understand what it means that God is good and your refuge. So without further ado, let's look at this story. So if you read the book of Jeremiah before, this chapter comes at a time when the northern kingdom of Israel has fallen, where we have Judah that's left in the southern kingdom and it started to apostatize. And Jeremiah was prophesying to Judah to let them know that Babylon is coming and you will be captured. Judah will be destroyed. So this is where it picks up in verse 1 of chapter 20. Now Pashur, the son of Immer, the priest, who was also the chief governor in the house of the Lord, heard that Jeremiah prophesied these things. Then Pashur hit Jeremiah the prophet and put him in stocks that were in the high gate of Benjamin, which was by the house of the Lord. And it came to pass on the morrow or the next day that Pashur brought forth Jeremiah out of the stocks. Then said Jeremiah unto him, The Lord hath not called thy name Pashur, but Magor Meshabib, which is translated fair on every side. For thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will make you a terror to yourself and to all your friends, and they shall fall by the sword of their enemies, and your eyes shall behold it. And I will give all Judah into the hand of the king of Babylon, and he shall carry them captive into Babylon, and shall slay them with the sword. Moreover, I will deliver all the strength of the city, and all the labors thereof, and all the precious things thereof, and all the treasures of the kings of Judah will I give into the hands of their enemies, which shall spoil them, and take them, and carry them to Babylon. And you, Pashur, and all that dwell in your house shall go into captivity, and you shall come to Babylon, and there you shall die, and shall be buried there, you and all your friends to whom you have prophesied lies. And this is where we start to see the anguish of Jeremiah. O Lord, you have deceived me, and I was deceived. You are stronger than I, and has prevailed. I am in derision daily. Everyone mocketh me. For since I spake, I cried out. I cried violence and spoil. Because the word of the Lord was made a reproach unto me, and a derision daily. Then I said, I will not make mention of him, nor speak any more of his name. But his word was in my heart as a burning fire, shut up in my bones. And I was weary with forbearing, or trying to restrain myself, and I could not stay. For I heard the defaming of many, fear on every side. Report, say they, and we will report it. All my familiars watch for my halting, or all my friends look for me to stumble, saying, Peradventure, he will be enticed, and we shall prevail against him, and we shall take our revenge on him. But the Lord is with me as a mighty, terrible one. Therefore my persecutors shall stumble, and they shall not prevail. They shall be greatly ashamed, for they shall not prosper. Their everlasting confusion shall not be forgotten. But, O Lord of hosts, that triest the righteous and seest the reins of the heart, let me see your vengeance on them, for unto you have I opened my cause. Sing unto the Lord, praise ye the Lord, for he hath delivered the soul of the poor from the hands of evildoers. And cursed be the day wherein I was born. Let not the day wherein my mother bare me be blessed. Cursed be the man who brought news to my father, saying, A man-child is born unto you, making him very glad. And let that man be as the cities which the Lord overthrew and repented not, and let him hear the cry in the morning and the shouting at noontide, because he slew me not from the womb, or that my mother might have been my grave, and her womb to be always great with me. Wherefore came I out of the womb, or why was I born? To see labor and sorrow, that my days should be consumed with shame. This message today will be coming from two perspectives: personal experience as well as professional experience. Personal, as I mentioned, that I suffered with clinical depression for a period of approximately 3 years. Professionally, as I worked in behavioral health for a few years, focusing on helping others or helping people that struggle with behavioral health diagnoses before switching to focusing on developmental disabilities. The irony that I was helping people that struggle with mental health, and I was unable to help myself when I started to struggle with it. All the worldly knowledge of what constitutes mental health, how to help others cope, never to heal, but to cope. I was not able to even help myself. However, this topic that is really touched upon in the world, let alone the church, today we will delve into the world of mental health and the multifaceted components of what constitutes true mental health and a never-mentioned cure for depression. To start, I want us to get the APA definition of mental health. That's from the American Psychological Association. So, according to the APA, mental health is a state of mind characterized by emotional well being, good behavioral adjustment, relative freedom from anxiety and disabling symptoms, and a capacity to establish constructive relationships and cope with the ordinary demands and stresses of life. And as mentioned, mental health incorporates a lot, and from looking at this definition, you can get a small glimpse into what all consists of good health, mentally that is. Within the field of psychology, we see a separation between two main fields of thought and the different approaches that are taken to attain mental health. I do not want to fail to mention that there are other smaller divisions that are currently growing and becoming more prominent in psychology, but I will only focus on the two main ones today. In one part, we have people that work primarily with those that have developmental disabilities, or DD. That will include different diagnoses such as autism, Asperger's, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, etc. While on the other hand, we have people that work with those that have behavioral health challenges, and this will include diagnoses such as depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, multi-personality disorder, etc. And when you work with the DD population, you often come across people that are considered dually diagnosed. That is, they have a diagnosis that with both a DD, they have both a DD diagnosis and a behavioral health diagnosis. For example, someone with autism may also have a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder, which will increase the challenges of that person to achieve mental health, according to the APA definition here. And the sad thing currently is when you work with someone that is dually diagnosed, there's often little to no help for that person to be able to achieve mental health. If this person is in crisis and they're sent to the hospital, they are often turned away with the hospital expressing that this person's issues are behavioral, while a psychiatric hospital will shun to help someone that has a DD diagnosis, stating that person's challenges are also behavioral or symptomatic in accordance to their DD diagnosis and not a mental health crisis, completely disregarding to answer the question, or the simple question, as to what is this person's baseline behavioral pattern. And the thing that is often recognized or known is that a psychiatric or behavioral health diagnosis can manifest itself differently in different people, even if the person does not have a DD diagnosis. And we typically only look at examples of someone with a psychiatric diagnosis and not a DD diagnosis, attributing all symptomology to how we believe that symptoms should manifest before we attempt to assist. But there's also a lack of resources, funding to assist a person that's DD diagnosed, that is duly diagnosed, as most people with such diagnoses have Medicare or Medicaid or even both. And to bill for all the services needed for that person to improve their mental health, you are unable to do so. Medicaid billing prevents you from being able to bill multiple services simultaneously, and it's often referred to as double dipping. So the person that needs behavioral health treatment is unable to receive it if they are currently receiving DD treatment simultaneously. And when they are going through a crisis that requires the expertise of both fields, they only get DD treatment as this will be considered their primary diagnosis, since you are typically born with a DD diagnosis. So the question then becomes, how are people with a DD diagnosis supposed to achieve mental health when they're unable to get treatment from a holistic approach, but only have access to limited, more targeted approaches that doesn't address the whole person? Switching gears and looking at a different field of thought, we will look at the behavioral health field. This is an area that you are probably more familiar with. You've seen it in the news more often. And people are lamenting the lack of resources and the help for those with a behavioral health diagnosis. And I honestly do believe that there are more behavioral health resources available out there than for those that have a DD diagnosis. But the issue that complicates behavioral health a lot is the stigma that is attached to someone that has a diagnosis like schizophrenia, bipolar, suffering from panic attacks, depressed, PTSD, etc. Stigma that will prevent a person or drive a person or even sometimes their own family from seeking help for them. Some may ask, what is a stigma? And it's simply a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance. In the past, it was a tattoo or branding on the person to let others know. Today, you are ostracized from society, from groups, events, and though it may not be physical or a visible mark, but it's a mental mark that, in my opinion, carries much more damage and effects to the person. Though I do not want to focus on all the different intricate details that encompasses these two strains of thought, but I wanted to just touch upon the behavioral health diagnosis that we are somewhat familiar with, and that is depression, and look at depression through the lens of the Sixth Commandment. The main point of this agenda item of covering mental health is just so we can get us somewhat familiar with the field of mental health before we really dive into the topic today. Okay, depression. Going back to the APA again, or how depression is defined, it is categorized by extreme sadness or despair that lasts more than a few days, interfering with activities of daily life that can be going back and forth to work, you're cooking, you're cleaning, taking care of your hygiene, things of that nature. And it can cause physical symptoms such as pain, weight loss or gain, sleeping pattern disruptions, or lack of energy. You also may experience an inability to concentrate, feelings of worthlessness or excessive guilt, and recurrent thoughts of death or suicide. Anyone that heard anything about depression in the past typically associate depression with this definition. And then and when it's boiled down into layman terms, the person is just really sad. But I would say that extreme grief from the loss of a loved one can elicit a lot of the same feelings and symptoms. So I want us to look at the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, which is the DSM. It's what is used to help diagnose someone medically with depression. So if you look here on the screen, I know you may not be able to see it that well, but on the right-hand side, you see symptoms, right? These are the 9 symptoms that are listed for depression, where you have your depressed mood, diminished interest or pleasure in activities, weight loss or poor appetite, inability to sleep or sleeping too much, psychomotor retardation, that means you're slowing down with how you typically do things or accomplish things, fatigue, loss of energy, feelings of worthlessness or excessive inappropriate guilt, diminished ability to think or concentrate, similar to being drunk, and recurrent thoughts of death or suicidal ideation. You have the list of the 9 symptoms there, and then when you look on the left-hand side, this is how it tells you how to diagnose that person. They're pretty much the same. As far as the major depressive episode, you have 5 or more depressive symptoms for longer than 2 weeks. Must have either depressed mood or loss of pleasure. So number 1 or 2 on the symptoms must be present. Then you got symptoms, and out of the 5 symptoms may cause significant distress or impairment, and no manic or hypermanic behavior. If that is present, then you start looking at bipolar disorder and things like that. When you're dealing with minor depressive episode, it's not much. It's literally the same thing. Instead of having 5 symptoms, you have 2 to 4. All right. So not just looking at the knowing what constitutes depression is important. It's also important to know what the risk factors of depression as well. These are what are considered risk factors, and I think as we look at them more closely, it will start to alarm a lot of us. The person's biochemistry. That is, certain chemicals in the brain may contribute to symptoms of depression. This is a major reason that we need to really start considering the health message and ensuring that we have a balanced diet, as what you eat truly changes the chemical makeup of your brain, your thoughts, your feelings, and even your actions. Foods such as processed meats, fried foods, refined sugars, and foods high in fat and dairy alter their brain chemistry. And we will talk about this a little bit more later. When you look at genetics, this speaks more to the hereditary nature of depression and some a little bit of the biochemical makeup of that person. But it talks a little about our diet again, but it's more so our body type, which is determined through genetics and tells us how we should best exercise, eat, and the sensitivity of our body to those chemicals that we ingest. So going against our genetics, not taking the time to understand how we were created, put us at risk, not just for depression, but many other maladies as well. There's a reason we are told we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Think about this example. Excessive sugar may make one person fat and more prone for developing diabetes, while the same sugar will not affect another person's weight, but make them more prone for depression. When you look at the personality, those are with low self-esteem who are easily overwhelmed by stress or generally pessimistic are more at risk for depression than others. And this goes back to our discussion about the fifth commandment and the responsibilities of both the parents and the child. We know that character is the aggregate of the standards that we hold, but personality is how we outwardly express that character. Thus, character development will play a major role in shaping the personality of the person, and rather they are predisposed or at risk for depression later in life. And then you got, finally, environmental factors. Continuous exposure to violence, neglect, abuse, or lack of morality may make some people more vulnerable to depression. What you behold will change you. Think back to the story of Jeremiah. What was he beholding? Think about today. What are we beholding? That determines our risk factor. Violence everywhere, news, video games, movies, etc. But now that we have an understanding of depression and what differentiates clinical depression from just normal feelings of sadness, as well as what places us at risk from depression, let us consider spiritual depression versus physical depression. So, what we have discussed so far thus far about depression, that should be considered the physical manifestations of depression. How we currently understand depression from a clinical point of view, as we looked at risk factors and criteria that a person must meet before being diagnosed with depression. What we'll be talking about now will be considered the spiritual manifestations of depression. And this discussion will be a segue into our sixth commandment of thou shalt not kill. But before we look at that, can someone please read 1 John chapter 3, 7 to 18? That's 1 John chapter 3, 7 to 18. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So keep what was just read in the back of your minds as we continue. Spiritual depression is a term that was coined by a Protestant minister in the late 1800s by the name of D. Martin Lloyd-Jones. And the term simply means to refer to a loss of spiritual vitality and joy. The persons experiencing spiritual depression will experience symptoms of losing touch with their faith, forgetting God, or struggling to find time for spiritual study. And they will often say that they have lost a connection to God or no longer feel close to Him. Other signs, as you see pictured here, should come as a little bit troubling to anyone that's a Christian. This goes back. Especially in these last days, these should come off as troubling. You struggle to find joy in worship. You withdraw from the church or religious community. You avoid other members of the church. You lose interest in regular church activities, or you perform them only from a sense of duty. Feelings as if the Bible study or other religious pursuit have lost their meanings. You fail to find comfort in prayer. Negative or pessimistic thinking about God or religion, and you question or doubt your faith and have a sense of hopelessness or discouragement. And with all these signs of spiritual depression, it kind of just boils down to you disconnecting from God and giving purpose, and your God-given purpose, and is mainly characterized in 4 different stages. You have disappointment, which is not getting something that you wanted and that you were really praying earnestly for. 2, with discontentment, you become dissatisfied with what the Lord is doing in your life, not recognizing God is sovereign in your life, and you get to a point where you feel that you know better than God, even without directly saying or acknowledging it in your heart. When you hit despair, you feel that there is no way out from the disappointing circumstance that you're facing. And finally, in destruction at this point, the person truly believes their despair and have reached the lowest of the low emotionally and spiritually. They will behave in a manner to damage the relationships, and this behavior can be aggressive or aggression, anger, extreme melancholy, or even more commonly, destroying another person's character. But as we consider spiritual depression, I want us to look quickly at another story in the Bible that I also believe provides the best light on this type of depression. Let's consider Job, chapter 10. As Job reached the stage of despair, I also would like you to pay especially close attention to the language Job is using to describe his despair, as he felt trapped in their present circumstances, and that he couldn't even argue or plead his case with God at this time. So Job 10, my soul is weary of my life. I will leave my complaint on myself. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. I will say unto God, do not condemn me. Show me wherefore thou contendest with me. Is it good unto you that thou shouldest oppress, that thou shouldest despise the work of your hands, and shine upon the counsel of the wicked? Have you eyes of flesh, or seest thou as man seest? Are your days as the days of man, or your years as man's days? Thou that inquirest after my iniquity and searchest after my sin, thou knowest that I am not wicked, and there is none that can deliver me out of your hands. Your hands have made me and fashioned me together round about, yet thou doest destroy me. Remember, I beseech thee, that thou hast made me as the clay, and wilt thou bring me to the dust again? Hast thou not poured me out as milk and curdled me like cheese? Thou hast clothed me with skin and flesh, and hast fenced me in with bones and sinews. Fence is another word for framed. Thou hast granted me life and favor, and your visitation hath preserved my spirit. And these things hast thou hid in your heart. I know that this is with you. If I sin, then you markest me, and thou wilt not acquit me from my iniquity. If I be wicked, woe unto me, and if I be righteous, yet will I not lift up my head. I am full of confusion. Therefore see thou my affliction. For it increases. You huntest me as a fierce lion, and again thou showest thyself marvelous unto me. Thou renewest your witness against me, and increasest thy indignation upon me. changes and war are against me. Wherefore then hast thou brought me forth out of the womb? Oh, that I may give up the ghost, and no eye has seen me. I should have been as though I had not been. I should have been carried from the womb to the grave. Are not my days few? Cease then and let me alone, that I may take comfort a little. Before I go whence I shall not return, even the land of darkness and the shadow of death, a land of darkness, as darkness itself and the shadow of death, without any order, and where the light is as darkness. There are similarities that do exist between both Job and Jeremiah, wishing for death and wishing that they were not even born. Now, as we consider Job and the spiritual depression that he was experiencing, I would like us to think again on the passage we initially read in 1 John at the start of this discussion on spiritual depression. We saw in this passage how to identify those that are the children of the devil and the children of God. We also see a reference to Cain and how he killed his brother. But let us pause here for a moment. Cain was disappointed that his offering was not accepted. God told him the reason and attempted to encourage Cain to correct his actions. Cain went to the next stage of discontentment, and it was at this stage that Abel was murdered. Despair didn't set in for Cain until God confronted him on his actions, and he pleads for a lesser sentence. Though he still lived a vagabond life away from others, Cain still continued to the next stage of destruction. And the rest of the story is known as we eventually get to Noah and the flood. This passage in 1 John is also very important, as it tells us that, like God, we need to intervene early with our brothers and sisters so that they can choose life, choose God. We need to warn them from the moment disappointment sets in. And as referenced in Ezekiel 33, 7-11, if we as Christians choose not to intervene, then we are no different than a murderer, as the blood of those that we fail to warn will be on our hands. But if we warn and that person still chooses to continue in sin, then their blood will be on their hands. Not only are we to intervene, but doing so in a manner to show that we, like Jesus, are willing to lay down our life for the brethren, as in verse 16 in that statement in 1 John we read. We want to encourage that person to trust and look to God as much as possible. But at the same time, we need to seek guidance from God in doing so. We do not want our encouragement to come off as condemning, similar to the same encouragement from the friends of Job. What Job's friends did, as you read the story further beyond the despair that Job articulated in chapter 10, was commit murder, or attempted to do so at least. So some of you may be asking, how is this killing or committing murder if we do not help someone that we can identify that is going through spiritual depression? Or even how did Job's friends engage in murder? Let's talk about this a little as we consider what it means to kill. According to the dictionary, to kill means to deprive of life in any manner, cause the death of, to slay, to destroy, to extinguish, or do away with. We look at this definition and only think about the act of physically taking the life of a person. But there is an act of spiritually killing a person, and that deals with character assassination. When you read the dialogue between Jesus and the Jews in John 8, you see that the Jews were intent on destroying the character of Jesus. Even when Jesus pleaded with them and explained to them in the most plain way, they did not understand. They refused to understand, and they continued to slander and destroy his character. And when they ran out of ways to destroy the character of Jesus, they picked up stones to stone him when Jesus fully revealed himself to them. Essentially, they moved from the point of trying to commit murder spiritually through the destruction of Jesus' character to trying to commit murder physically. This is why Jesus tells us in Matthew 6 that being angry with your brother without cause is synonymous with killing. Since it starts in the heart, it moves to slander and then to the physical act. But the important verse in the chapter of John 8 was verse 44, when Jesus told them that they are of their father, the devil, who was a murderer from the beginning, not abiding in the truth and speaking lies. So the same scene played out in heaven. The devil first hated God in his heart. He moved to slander the character of God by lying about God's character in heaven, refused to abide in the truth, because if he spoke the truth, he would not be able to lie about the character of God and persuade others to follow. The same character assassination is displayed in the story of Job as we double back to examine the action of his friends. We see in the beginning of the book of Job, Job, was a man that was perfect and upright, feared God and eschewed evil. God was also testified that he was a perfect man, upright, one that feared him and eschewed his evil. And as 1 John 5:9 tells us, that we received the witness of man, but the witness of God is greater. And we got the witness of Job from the writer, man first, and then the greater witness from God himself in that same chapter. There were two witnesses, and this tells me that everyone knew the character of Job. And for his friends to accuse him, as they did, insist that he sinned, was a lie. And to directly destroy the character of Job, to commit murder like the Jews were doing when they tried to destroy the character of Christ. So to circle back around to the original topic of depression and thou shalt not kill, we see thus far that the word kill incorporates both physical act and the spiritual act. But we only looked at it from the perspective of the murderer killing a victim that was someone besides themselves. But what if the murderer and the victim is one and the same? Physically, we know this term is suicide, while spiritually, this is depression. So depression is often described by others as a slow way of being dead. When in despair, the stage of spiritual depression that we talked about earlier, you feel that there is no way out. You think that there is no hope, and you act upon these things. And this is what is considered as a cognitive triangle in psychology, as you see pictured here, where all elements in this triangle are related and affect one another. So your thoughts can affect your behaviors and your feelings, whereas your behaviors can affect your thoughts and your feelings. So they're all interrelated. And the destruction stage in spiritual depression adds another element to the cognitive triangle and complicates the issue altogether. And as we see now, this triangle becomes a square that is also interrelated and affects one another. And if you recall, the destruction stage is when the person believes their despair and reaches the lowest of the low spiritually and emotionally. So when you're looking back at Job, his beliefs did not mesh with his thoughts, feelings, or his behaviors. The same with Jeremiah. But when false beliefs start to mesh with your thoughts, behaviors, and feelings, that is when you start to see people engage in behaviors that destroy the characters of others, destroy their own character with increased self-deprecating thoughts, suicide, etc. But let's look quickly at John 3:14-16. It's a very familiar text, but I want us to consider it closely as based on what we've talked about so far. So that's John 3:14-16. And whoever gets here first can read it. Yes, ma'am. We must lift up Jesus and look to him. Not just look to him, but we must also believe. A belief that will keep us from perishing. This belief in Christ, in God, he who kept Job, kept Jeremiah, kept Ezekiel, and the many other patriots that experienced depression. And I ask, do you believe in Christ? A belief that will cause God to marvel like he did when he did with the centurion in Luke chapter 7. A belief that understands deeply that he set you free from sin when he came. And a belief that takes him at his word only. As mentioned before, False beliefs can tilt or alter your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and eventually kill you. But it is the true beliefs that will save you and cause you to live. Beliefs are still interrelated with thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, whether true or false. But we want to ensure that our beliefs are true. Over time, true beliefs will also alter how you feel about others and yourself. They will alter your actions towards others and yourself, and the thoughts you have about others and yourself, essentially a cure for depression. Let's look at this statement quickly. From Selected Messages and the Last Day Events. Though Sister White was talking about persecution arising from the church when this statement was mentioned, it is the last part that I believe that provides us with a glimpse of the importance of beliefs. The unbelief indulged, the doubts expressed, the darkness cherished encourages the presence of evil angels and opened a way for the accomplishments of Satan's devices. Something to seriously think about when it comes to unbelief or even false beliefs. It is easy to take what we have talked about thus far and walk away with the conclusion that unbelief is deadly and would be equivalent to the act of suicide. And honestly, I would not wholeheartedly disagree with you, but I will question, what is the unbelief in? If I do not believe in myself and lies that I tell myself, the lies that I hear about myself, but believe in Jesus, then unbelief is not death, but life. The problem is how we perceive life so far, or how have we been conditioned to perceive life, and that is more is better, more of the same opinion is right, majority rules, and this great array of noise that comes from the crowd. Our thoughts start to choke out that still small voice of the Lord, and our unbelief shifts from the lies of our surroundings to Jesus. This unbelief in Jesus depresses our emotions and feelings, which also depresses our actions, behaviors, and depresses our abilities to remain sober in thought. Depression is truly a slow way to die or to kill oneself. And as Sister White expressed in her statement, unbelief not only is a slow way to kill oneself, but encourages the presence of evil angels and opens the way for the accomplishment of Satan's devices. So with all that talk about making sure we understand depression, let's talk about resilience. So thus far, we have covered in our discussion mental health, spiritual versus physical depression, and we looked at what it means to kill versus to live from an approach that wasn't comparative, but emphasizing one's beliefs. In this last section of the agenda, I want us to look at methods of resilience for those that may be suffering from depression and talk about the approach that I personally use, as it may be helpful. But I do want to caution you that depression can manifest itself differently, but similarly in each individual person. And finding an approach that is best tailored to you is also important. First and foremost, the one approach that will make us more resilient towards the risk of depression is first to believe in Jesus. This is easy for a Christian, but I'm not talking about theoretical belief where you just come to church, listen to the preacher, and go back home to everyday life. But a belief that is based on what you know of him, what you have experienced with spending time with him. And this is where I was thankful to God, because I was supposed to give this message last week, but for whatever reason, it was pushed to this week. And Elder Lewis taught last week about knowing God. So we need to know God. Studying regularly and often to strengthen that belief. And studying needs to be done with a purpose in mind. Honestly, just reading the Bible is boring. And it's not something you should be hearing from up here, but it's boring. And if you get to the genealogies without a purpose, you will probably put the Bible down after the second or third round of I begat this or I begat that. But if you are reading with the purpose to prove Jesus' statement in John 5:39, search the scriptures, for in them you think you have eternal life, and there are they which testify of me. Looking to see how the different passages talk or testify of Jesus, looking with a purpose takes away the boredom of reading and causes the mind to be more engaged and active. With another question to pursue while you're reading, and you'll probably question this question or even this approach, but search the Bible with the purpose to disprove the existence of God. Not only will you get to know him, but you will believe in him more deeply if you even attempt to do this. I actually know a person that was an atheist that attempted this, and now he's a pastor. Wondering how he ever didn't believe in God before. And this isn't a unique example. However, honestly, it doesn't matter what your purpose is, but you need a purpose when you start reading the Bible. God will make himself known to you, and as he wants to be known to you. And when you get to the parts that need spiritual discernment, and through prayer God provides you with the spirit to discern, this interaction, this give and take will cause you to know God and who he is. This is a primary method I use to combat my own depression, and it honestly have not just changed my beliefs, but it makes it easier to dismiss the things that I know that aren't true. And when you go back to John 3:15 and 16, a belief in Jesus will cause you not to perish. Another method to increase resilience is found in Matthew 26. It is a very long chapter, and I'm not going to read it. And I do expect you when you go home to read it, though. But I encourage you, but it describes the closing scenes of Jesus' life. So if we turn there quickly and we can try to do a summation real quick of this chapter. That is Matthew chapter 26. So this chapter comes immediately after Jesus finishes telling his disciples and telling people how his second coming will be like through the parables of the 10 virgins, the talents given to the servants, and the separation of the sheep and the goats. Jesus tells his disciples that he will be betrayed and crucified. The chief priests, scribes, and elders conspire how they would take Jesus secretly to kill him in verses 1-5. Judas, as a disciple, went to betray Jesus after Jesus makes his announcement that he would be betrayed. And Judas asks the same people that were earlier conspiring to kill Jesus, what will they give him so he can deliver Jesus to them in verses 14-16. They are now eating the Passover meal, and Jesus is letting his disciples know again that he will be betrayed, and identifies who the betrayer is in verses 17-30. Knowing what is to come, Jesus went to Gethsemane with a few of his disciples and prayed. Let's read verse 38. So that's 26:38 real quick, and see if this don't sound like depression. Then saith he unto them, my soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. Tarry you here and watch with me. Verse 39, Jesus is trusting and believing in the will of God to get him through this trying hour. He sought his friends who were sleeping at this time in verses 40-46. There are times when you are not able to get any assistance even from your friends, even if you ask. So Jesus went back to prayer and trusted in the will of God, that he knew from the scriptures the will of God from interaction or spending time with God constantly in prayer. And like Jeremiah in the rest of the chapter of Matthew, the same people that he came to save and to warn, his friends betraying and leaving him. Jesus experienced the torment, the act of Judas' betrayal with a kiss, priests looking for false witnesses, tearing their clothes to add to the dramatic flair and to justify their condemnation of Jesus, loved ones spitting on you, hitting you, and deriding you, and a friend denying that they even know you on multiple occasions. Friends, what I'm trying to tell you is that depression is real. And if you have not experienced it, it will become very real to you, especially when you start being persecuted for Christ's sake. But Jesus gave us a blueprint of what to do to be resilient. Pray and trust in God. Trust in the God you already know and the belief that you have in him. Knowing that the trying time was coming, Jesus, sought the comfort of his Father, which strengthened his belief and endurance to be able to go through the things that were coming. There are also different supplementary actions, that can be taken to help further increase one's resilience or lessen your risk for depression. So let's look at a familiar acronym quickly as we close, New Start. And we'll see how each of these pieces can increase our resilience to depressive symptoms. Specifically, we will look at how the effect of this acronym is on the brain. Since depression starts in the brain, primarily it's a dysfunction of the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the dorsomedial thalamus, which is part of the prefrontal cortex region that deals with our decision making. And just in case, no one knows what the New Start acronym means, it's nutrition, exercise, water, sunshine, temperance, air, rest, and trust in God. So starting with nutrition. Foods that you eat affects the neurons of the major cells of the brain. Foods that are rich in fat, sugars, causes inflammation of the neurons and inhibits the formation of new neurons. This is especially important if you are genetically predisposed to depression or perceive events in an ungodly manner, and you are trying to build and strengthen habits and thoughts that are in accordance to the will of God. Improper nutrition disrupts the neuroplastic ability of the brain and makes it impossible for the brain to change through growth or the reorganization of knowledge. To put it in a more simplistic way, the new man that Christ has called you to be in Ephesians chapter 4 will not be possible with improper nutrition. So conversely, a good diet as outlined in Genesis does the opposite. But I do not want you to neglect the fact that depression can get to a point where changes in diet will not be sufficient to address, and medications are sometimes needed. Medications such as SSRIs, which are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or atypical antipsychotic. Both types of medications that play on the neural activity of the brain to limit symptoms of depression. But God is still good. A well-balanced diet to ensure that we are getting the appropriate nutrients, both macro and micro, can ensure that we get similar effects of the medications currently utilized in the field today and maintain a balance within our bodies. But I'll digress. I'm going to a whole nother topic altogether. The E for exercise. Exercise improves our memory, increases synaptogenesis, or the new creation of synapses that facilitate learning and memory in the brain. The verse in 1 Timothy encourages us to engage in character building. The exercise of godliness. The little that physical exercise profits is by the increase of blood flow and removal of toxins from the body that inhibit the functions of the brain. When bodybuilding, there's a term called progressive overload. It is when you lift weights to exhaustion and tear muscle fibers, rest, and go back to lifting weights again to exhaustion and tearing muscle fibers again. The only difference is that with each repeat of the process after a period of rest, you slowly increase the amount of weight progressively. This causes the muscles to grow back stronger than before they were torn, thus increasing your strength. Progressive overload is similar to when we build character and can be summed up in one word: trials. Water. It helps the brain cells to communicate with one another, cleansing toxins in ways that impairs function of both the body and brain and carries nutrients to the brain. Conversely, a lack of water, dehydration, decreases one's ability to think and make decisions, clouding one's judgment and their ability to be able to discern between truth and lies, symptoms that are very reminiscent to being drunk. So it's no wonder the Bible tells us to be sober. S for sunshine. Helps with the release of serotonin, a chemical that helps with carrying messages in the brain between nerve cells. Sunshine also helps with improving mood, sleep, digestion, wound healing, and many other benefits. When we get to temperance, it's a big one, and I will not spend a whole nother sermon on this right now. But a lack of temperance produces changes in emotion, personality, perception, learning, memory, and damages the nervous system. Intemperate behavior physically changes your brain by reducing the size of your prefrontal cortex, the area that helps you to reason, make decisions, and it enlarges the amygdala, the part of the brain that helps regulate emotion. And more, we move on feelings more and less on reason. God said, "Come and let us reason together." He didn't say, "Come and let us feel together." It is the enemy that wants our actions, thoughts, and behaviors to be based on feelings, and thus we are encouraged to be intemperate. So let's just practice temperance. Air. Did you know that a lack of air damages the cognitive abilities of kids? And the same lack of clean air causes a cognitive decline in adults. This is why it's ever so important to get out and get some fresh air. Gardening, hiking, and being amongst the trees is also important, as the trees helps to filter air and release clean oxygen. Rest. Without rest, you are not able to form or maintain any neural pathways in the brain. You are unable to learn, create new memories, concentrate, and be sober-minded, especially when suffering from depression. Rest allows you to distinguish truth from lies that you hear or are telling yourself. And finally, with the last letter for trust. Trust affects the brain by decreasing the activity of the amygdala. It's the same part of the brain that we talked about before that's associated with pleasure seeking, fear response, maintaining homeostasis in the body or balance, and thus are also decreasing your level of fear of the unknown and the known. There are plenty of scriptures that can corroborate the importance of trust, but I want us to look at these two real quick in Psalms. So Psalms 56, 3-4. And that reads, "What time I am afraid, I will trust in thee. In God I will praise his word. In God I have put my trust. I will not fear what flesh can do unto me." And then if you skip over to Psalm 37, 5-9. "Commit your way unto the Lord. Trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. And he shall bring forth your righteousness as the light, and thy judgment as the noonday. Rest in the Lord, and wait patiently for him. Fret not yourself because of him who prospereth in his way, because of the man who bringeth wicked devices to pass. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not yourself in any wise to do evil, for evildoers shall be cut off. But those that wait on the Lord, they shall inherit the earth." So in summary, hopefully through this discussion, if you're struggling with depression or you realize that your belief in God is not where it should be, then this will be an opportunity to start to believe in, to start to live. John 14, verse 6, Jesus tells us he's the way, the truth, and the life. The belief in Jesus is life, as he will dispel any false narratives that we tend to believe and show us a way to joy and life. And I'll close with Hebrews chapter 3, 12-13 and 18-19. "Take heed, my brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief, departing from the living God, but exhort or encourage one another daily, while it is today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. And to whom swear he that they should not inherit or enter into his rest? That is to say, those that shall not see the promised land, but to them that believe not." So we see that they could not enter because of unbelief. And Hebrews chapter 4:11 tells us, "Let us therefore labor to enter into that rest, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief." With that, Pastor, you want to close for us?